Friedrich Radszuweit was born to humble beginnings that would greatly contrast his ambitions later in life. He was born on April 15th, 1876, in a small village near what was then Innsbruck, East Prussia, and today is located in Russia. He was the son of farmers, and like many Prussian men, he served in the military for a brief period. After his military time in Schleswig-Holstein, he discovered his true passion working as a salesman in Königsberg. He leveraged that love for business to establish a publishing empire of LGBTQ publications that helped launch the first mass movement toward homosexual emancipation in the world. His position meant that he had unprecedented potential to influence public opinion amongst the gay community in Germany. And while he was an active leader in the fight to repeal the national anti-gay law, paragraph 175, he ultimately refused to leverage that power against the ascendant Nazi party. In 1901, Friedrich took his sharp business acumen to Berlin, and he quickly found success as the owner of a woman's garment business and a retail store. He also made his entrance into Berlin's vibrant and rapidly changing social scene. Specifically, Friedrich got involved in the movement of friendship associations. These associations used friendship as a euphemism for their existence as organizations for gay men. The various friendship associations that spread throughout Germany were somewhat political, but they mainly functioned as a social venue where gay men, and to a lesser extent lesbians, could congregate and socialize amongst themselves. Friedrich's initial interest may have been social, but he saw something else in the friendship associations. Friedrich saw a burgeoning market of openly queer people who had cash that spent as well as anyone in Weimar Germany. Ultimately, Friedrich recognized the potential for profit in his community's buying power, and that profit-driven mentality would define his relationship with the queer community in Germany for the rest of his life. In early October 1922, Friedrich began his publishing career by publishing an open letter in Friendship, the leading homosexual publication at the time. In the letter, Friedrich took a radically optimistic tone that would define the future of his work. He believed that gay emancipation was right around the corner, and that gay men simply had to prove to the rest of German society that they could be respectable, productive citizens. However, there was a caveat in Friedrich's vision for German homosexual emancipation. The homosexuals who deserved emancipation, according to Friedrich, were those who were law-abiding, middle-class, educated, monogamous, and adhered to traditional gender norms. He called effeminate gay men, male sex workers, and trans people the dregs.
In what historian Laurie Marhoefer calls the Weimar settlement, emancipation for the respectable would come at the cost of the further marginalization of Germany's many queer and trans people who did not fit into the rigid expectations for social behavior.
By that time, Friedrich was on the governing board of the National Friendship Association. He wasted no time leveraging his position of power to advance his view of homosexual emancipation. In early 1923, he convinced two Berlin friendship associations to split from the wider network and form something new with him, the League for Human Rights. This organization would serve as the beating heart for Friedrich's queer publishing empire, but it would also serve as the mouthpiece for some of his worst political impulses. Friedrich's first publishing house, or Politverlag, was killed by inflation, but his subsequent publishing firm, Radszuweit Verlag, went on to publish some of Friedrich's most well-known work. In 1923, Friedrich launched the League for Human Rights' premier publication, Journal for Human Rights, and it grew to compete with well-established publications like Friendship. Although he had used the magazine to grow his stature in the past, Friedrich now viewed Friendship and the magazine's owners as fierce competition. Friedrich did his best to ensure that his publications could be purchased on newsstands. With impressive advertisements revenues and his personal fortune at his disposal, he was able to pay lawyers to help keep his publications off of censorship lists and defend his business against lawsuits. He also practiced a form of self-censorship following the passage of the 1926 law to protect youth from trashy and filthy publications, by removing erotic images and anything that could be considered obscene from his magazines. The League for Human Rights was not the first or only homosexual emancipation organization that existed in Germany at this time, but it was by far the largest, boasting 100,000 members at its peak. The sexologist Dr. Magnus Hirschfeld co-founded the Scientific Humanitarian Committee in 1897, which is considered the first LGBTQ+ rights organization in the world, and he had run the Institute for Sexual Science since 1919. Hirschfeld's advocacy was based on science and medical research, which many ordinary LGBTQ+ Germans did not find all that accessible or easy to understand. In 1903, Adolf Brand founded the Community of the Special, which was a misogynistic and horribly anti-Semitic organization that idealized masculinity and war, arguing that aggressive homosexual men should be the rightful rulers of the nation. Both Hirschfeld and Brand differed radically in their approaches and goals. Hirschfeld advocated for a specific homosexual liberation, while Brand was fighting for a more generic sexual liberation that was warped by his misogyny and anti-Semitism. However, they were both united by the fact that their respective organizations sought to move Weimar Germany toward their preferred goals by appealing towards elite institutions. Friedrich was a controlling entrepreneur who demonstrated a talent for understanding content that had mass appeal. His company published a range of newspapers and magazines catered to different audiences. The Island was a literary magazine, and the Journal of Friendship was a more informal publication for entertainment purposes. Friedrich even published a lesbian magazine, The Girlfriend, and The Third Sex, a magazine for trans people. For the first time, lesbian and trans people, not just cis gay men, had an outlet to write about their lives in their own worlds. Friedrich's publications adopted a more accessible tone and often included news, fiction, poetry, puzzles, games, and advertisements for local events at LGBTQ+ clubs. He truly built the first mass movement homosexual emancipation organization in the world. If that was all Friedrich accomplished, he would be rightly celebrated as a successful gay pioneer at a time where there were no other gay publishers around. Unfortunately, Friedrich's story does not end there. In the late 1920s, economic, social, and political turmoil rocked the Weimar Republic, and voters turned to extremist politicians to solve their problems, including those in the right-wing Nazi Party. Despite the Nazis' public displays of homophobia, Friedrich did not mobilize his empire to counter the growing threats of fascism. Perhaps trying to protect his business interests, he wanted to remain non-political. In a January 1931 article in The Girlfriend, Friedrich insisted that the Nazis' homophobic rhetoric was just campaign talk to drum up votes. He said, "We do not believe that even the National Socialists, Nazis, will proceed so rigorously against the homosexuals as they announced before the September 1930 elections." Over a year later, in March 1932, Friedrich wrote, quote, "I'd be the last to support the Hitler Party," but he pointed out that Hitler had allowed Ernst Röhm, who was openly gay, to stay in power as the head of the Nazi stormtroopers. Another open letter, in The Girlfriend, Friedrich praised Hitler for focusing on political issues instead of sexual questions, and even offered to advise Hitler, in a nonpartisan way, about homosexual issues. Friedrich Radszuweit had long positioned himself as a champion of the most conservative elements of Weimar Germany's homosexual culture. He thought that commitment to respectability would save him from the coming Nazi storm. In 1931, as the Nazi Party was gaining seats in the parliament, he told his readers that the Nazis would not target respectable homosexuals, but would only target the Jewish homosexuals, like Magnus Hirschfeld. Friedrich died of tuberculosis in 1932, so he did not live to witness the Nazi government dismantle his life's work within weeks of coming to power. His publishing empire was inherited by his then life partner, Martin Radszuweit, whom Friedrich had adopted as a son, since marriage was not an option to establish Martin as his legal next of kin. Friedrich's career did not stop stormtroopers from raiding and destroying the Radszuweit publishing house in February of 1933. Martin died of unknown causes soon after, so he too did not live to witness the Nazis wage a violent, murderous campaign against all LGBTQ+ Germans, including those who had supported the party in its early years. Friedrich spent the latter part of his life and the pinnacle of his publishing career appealing to the growing fascist party in Germany. He hoped that his condemnation of his fellow queer people would gain him favor with the leaders of the Nazi Party. When the Nazi Party took control of Germany, they did not spare Friedrich from their wrath. Friedrich Radszuweit's story demonstrates that appeasement is never a viable strategy for halting the rise of fascism, and that social acceptance of some members of the LGBTQ+ community should not and cannot be bought at the expense of the safety of others.